Welcome to Behavioral Grooves. My name is Kurt Nelson.
And I'm Tim Houlihan. We are building a community of people who want to understand how to positively apply behavioral science to their work and life. We achieve this by having fun and engaging conversations with a wide variety of people. Today, we talked with Dr. Amit Sood.
Dr. Sood is a Mayo Clinic physician with specialties in pediatrics, internal medicine, and oncology, as well as certificates in acupressure, yoga, and reiki. He is the author of several books, including The Guide to Stress-Free Living and The Handbook for Happiness, along with dozens of peer-reviewed papers. He's a remarkably well-rounded and humble healthcare practitioner, and it's clear from talking with him that he cares deeply about his patients and the quality of his work. His passion was inspirational for us, and we hope you have the same experience.
Definitely. Our conversation circled around, indirectly sometimes, the topic of happiness and how we can increase it and what takes it away. Amit had some fascinating insights into specific things that we can do to increase our happiness, and we were glad to speak with him about it.
In our grooving session, we discuss how we can apply these insights into our work. Specifically, we look at the types of interactions that we have: contentious interactions, transactional, or affiliative. We look at the increasing need for responsiveness that people have and how that impacts how we interact with them and the way that we work. And we also groove about intentionality,
which was very fun. Okay, so we would be grateful if you can help expand our Behavioral Grooves community by recommending this or another Behavioral Grooves episode to a friend, or leaving a review on your favorite pod service.
Also, if you're interested in connecting with Tim or me, we can be reached on Twitter or LinkedIn. Our handles will be shown in the show notes, and we would absolutely love to start an affiliative conversation with you.
Love, love, love. Please sit back and be happy as you listen to our conversation with Dr. Amit Sood. Amit Sood, welcome to the Behavioral Grooves podcast.
Thank you for having me. Lovely to meet you both and lovely to connect with your audience.
All right. Yeah, thank you. We're going to start with a little speed round. Would you prefer to travel with an itinerary or without an itinerary?
Without.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee, definitely.
Definitely.
Which mythical character would you like to see brought to life? A dragon or a unicorn?
A unicorn. I have 2 daughters.
You would be a hero if you were to do that. All right. So which is harder for people to do, to apply compassion or apply forgiveness?
Forgiveness is more difficult.
More difficult. Well, let's go from there. So actually, I would love to talk about unicorns, but I think we should start with, you have you've written a few books. You've done a lot of work on happiness and on resilience and on a variety of things. And you have a way of looking at that, of which compassion and forgiveness and acceptance, and I'm going to draw a blank on the other, gratitude and meaning are some of those main factors. So why don't you talk a little bit about that, and then we can get into, how people apply that into their lives.
Sure. In response to your question, which is more difficult, compassion or forgiveness, when you look at it from a hardcore scientific perspective, contemplating revenge activates the brain's pleasure center. So if you punch me on the nose, and if I'm thinking about retribution, that's giving me pleasure. And how can I let go of eating dark chocolate, which gives me pleasure, which is retribution? So forgiveness by itself is challenging for the human brain because unforgiveness activates our pleasure center. While when you look at compassion, thinking or acting compassion activates the brain's pleasure center. So we feel rewarded when we think in compassionate terms, or when we think in, or we act in compassionate terms. So compassion is much more easier, much more accessible. And you can apply compassion very broadly. Forgiveness intrinsically means you were hurt. It is often construed as weakness by people, and while compassion is empowering. And that's why compassion is intrinsic to us. We all have had compassion because, everybody who has worked with raised little children knows compassion. So compassion is intrinsic to who we are. It's sort of wired in our brain. The 5 principles in the program are gratitude, compassion, acceptance, meaning, and forgiveness. So the way we have done this is I was looking at what principles engage the brain's higher cortical areas, like prefrontal cortex in particular, and what principles quiet the lower limbic areas. And these 5 principles really stood out. So we sort of put them in the program, and then we assign each of them a day. So Mondays are our days of gratitude, Tuesdays of compassion, Wednesdays of acceptance, and so on. Friday is our day of forgiveness. And you will notice that we try to be pragmatic. You only have to forgive 1 day a week. It's only on Friday.
How did you come to arrive at these 5 pillars as the principles?
So these 5 principles all engage, from a neuroscience perspective, the brain's prefrontal cortex, and they quiet our lower cortical areas, the amygdala. That's number 1. Number 2, when you look at a variety of different faiths, different belief patterns in the world, these principles encompass almost all the different belief patterns I can think about. Each of the regions or belief patterns have a specific focus. We try to integrate them all. And 2 of these are very active, gratitude and compassion. Acceptance, meaning, and forgiveness take a little bit of effort. So we start with 2 easy, which engaging ones, which are gratitude and compassion, and then we build on to the others. No single principle is enough. So if you have just gratitude or just compassion, you'll either just, gratitude alone can become very superficial. Compassion alone can really deplete you. Forgiveness alone is just not possible unless you have these principles. And so just as we have 5, fingers in our hands, so that's how we have these 5 principles.
That's fantastic. And so help our listeners understand, when you talk about this program, this is a program that you've developed working with Mayo and different things. And it's also you've outlined it in a couple of the books that you've written. So help us understand how this program works.
So first of all, I have learned from over thousands and thousands, perhaps 100,000 patients who have worked with thousands and thousands of colleagues and scientists and philosophers and contemplatives. So it's a tall order for me to say I have developed. I'm really standing on the mountain of these highly accomplished beings. So we've just sort of tried to put things together. Right. So the way this program works, it has 2 phases. One is the bolus phase, where we help you learn the core neuroscience of stress. So when you look at the stressors overall in the world, there is the global perspective, which is the constant state of speed increasing in the world, which is causing our cognitive and emotional overload. Then is the regional perspective or local perspective, which is wherever you're working or the family you're living, there is the state of demand resource imbalance and perceived lack of control and lack of meaning. I mean, everybody's trying to pack 10 pounds of sand in 3-pound sand bag.
Yeah.
And then the third part is the personal factor, which is how our brain operates. Our brain is wonderful at multiplying our stress. So, we mind wander a lot. Think about this. When you step on a nail, what will you do? Withdraw your foot or dig deeper? The answer is withdraw your foot. And now if you turn on the news, then there is news of a terrorist attack. What will you do? Turn it off right away or watch more? So most people will watch more. So see, our sensory system is designed to withdraw from pain, while our mind is designed to go deeper into pain. So we have some some neural vulnerabilities which make us multiply our stress. So I sort of shared this in an uplifting way with the participants as a first step. And then we share as a second step solutions to this. How do you work with the imperfect system, global, regional, and personal? And how do you find ways to transcend these through practices and perspectives that are simple, deep, scalable, very relationship centric, and very 21st century. So we have nothing like 45 minutes of meditation. We really ask people to, sometimes what I share is if you have a cup of milk, we don't add more milk to the cup of milk. We add chocolate powder in the milk, so the volume doesn't increase. So that's the whole model. So we share that over maybe 2 hours or so, and the core program, and then there is the infusion after the bolus that continues for all one's life.
Okay, and those are just again, you're helping people live in this life that we have, which, as you had mentioned, these global stressors, the local stressors, and personal components, to live life less stressed, more happy, and have just an overall better quality. Is that the component? So who would come to a session that you hold, or who would be beneficial for something like this?
So any Homo sapiens with a brain will benefit. So,
I'm out. All right, there you go.
I hope it includes both of you. So anyone with a working brain. So we basically, the entire program is really anchored in neuroscience. It is really anchored in understanding of vulnerabilities in the design of human brain. So for our ancestors, for example, it was very important to focus on threat. And that's why when we turn on the news and see a negative news, we keep watching more. And that's why news channels feed us negative news. Even people who say they like to watch positive news, when you show them positive and negative news, their eyes track the negative news. That's how we design. So we have some traps in our brain, which has made us cognitively very brilliant, but emotionally, still a work in progress. And
go ahead.
No, this combination is causing a lot of stress. So we share that, and that applies to I think everybody, because we all have very similar designs of the brain.
Right. There's a quote that so from the Stress-Free Living book that I just loved. I've highlighted it and wrote it. I just want to read it here because I think it ties right into what you were just saying. It says, "The mind isn't a rational, pragmatic utilitarian. Rather, it's short-sighted, lacks self-control, is guided by rigid biases, jumps to premature conclusions, and frequently gets hijacked by impulses, infatuations, and fear. Although a phenomenal tool, the mind falls prey to distractions and the sway of emotion. The mind swims in a current of contradictory and competing predispositions. It wants to be happy, but forgets what will make it happy." I love that.
I can't believe I wrote that.
You did.
It's really more complex than so. If you and I met in a forest and 10,000 years ago, and we walked away from each other without punching each other's nose, that was a very good meeting, because we were not kind to each other. But now, if you don't respond to my text in 5 minutes, I'm going to take it personal. And I'll feel insulted because you're not responsive to me anymore. You don't care about me anymore, right? And so we've become much more sensitive. Our expectations are unrealistic from each other. And that's how we get emotionally hurt. I mean, emotional hit and run happens every single day. And there's no law for that. I'm sure you perhaps have experienced an emotional hit and run in the last few days, right? So, and then our brain tends to multiply this. We stew on it, we mind wander, we add additional context, and we get stuck in this, unfortunately. And if you, on top of that, have genetic predisposition to stress. So, for example, people who have low prefrontal dopamine tend to be anxious and have low patience. So earlier, when somebody was driving and they would cut me across on the road, come immediately in front of me, then I would say, "Oh, this guy doesn't, he needs a driver's license test. And now I say, oh, this guy has low prefrontal dopamine. And so it's my perspective of how I look at. So basically, if you have genetic vulnerability to stress and were not treated kindly as a child, those are 2 strikes. And on top of that, if you have an adult stressor, that's the 3rd strike. Anyone who has all 3 strikes gets a mental health problem. Oh. They are the ones who develop, depression and anxiety. So it is not people's fault. But 80-90% of the stress is not an individual's mistake. It just happens to us. Wow. And that is what keeps me awake at night. And that is what really gives me energy, that I want to take this message to people to let them know that, it's almost like dental caries. I mean, just as you can take care of your dental health, you can take care of your mental health.
I love that. I'm curious as to what in your environment, I'm thinking about the environment that you grew up in. How did that contribute to the work that you've done?
Yeah. So where I grew up, I spent the first half of my life in India and the second half in the US. I count both places as my home. I think it made me resilient. It lowered my expectations. So I grew in a 400 or 500 square feet home, 6 of us. We didn't have hot and cold water. We actually, water was, about a half an hour a day, we would have water in the tap, and then so you store it. And so taking bath in frigid cold was a very painful experience. And now, so I came from that very low expectation world to, there was no insurance. There was no life insurance, health insurance, disability insurance. There was nothing. So you all thrived on relationships. So you needed to know the milkman, the postman, you needed to know the grocery guy on a personal basis. So we developed a very relationship-centric life. And I think what has happened to us is that because we have all kinds of insurances and all kinds of securities and all the resources, we do not invest enough in relationships. And the interesting part of us humans is one of the greatest source of joy is relationships. So by virtue of our technological and financial success, we have made ourselves lonely. And that's a byproduct. And the epidemic of loneliness in our society, there's just so few people we can confide in. So all that helped me understand the value of relationships, the value of having measured expectations. And of course, I learned from teachers. I learned from the yoga teachers and my mother and others to sort of develop a little bit of insight into all of this.
Wow. I'm sorry, but I just don't have this really great follow-up question for that, because that was fabulous.
So, I think one of the things that you were talking about here is just in this world of building relationships and how the current environment, given the technology and various different aspects of it, don't necessarily help that, right? They don't build those interpersonal relationships. And we get caught in the immediate now of our little phones, of our computers, of our television sets, and we miss the larger opportunity of the long-term happiness that we have for these short-term dopamine hits that we get. Can you talk a little bit about that? Is that anything that you found?
Oh, yeah. So there's 3 kinds of interactions you can have at any time. You can have an adversarial. So we could be shouting at each other right now, but thankfully we are not. It could be a very transactional interaction, and we could be just handling a business, or it could be a more affiliative interaction. So bulk of our interactions these days are transactional.
Okay.
While we need 6-7 hours of affiliative interaction every day to feel good about ourselves. So with the grocery clerk, with the teller, with the cab guy, with the a random stranger who is with you in the elevator, with we can share a smile, a casual hello, or someone a nice conversation. It is so easy to convert a transactional connection to a affiliative connection. When I come back home, one of the rituals I have is I pause in the garage and I remind myself, okay, I'm going to meet some very special people I haven't met for a month. And it changes. I was talking to my neighbor yesterday. They were 2-year-old. And I said, well, he's 7,000 days away from college. So, so gives you perspective. My teenager is 1,200 days away from college. So when you have this presence, which prioritizes affiliative connection all day long with the person who you're chatting over the phone or through the internet or sending email, there's a person behind. Then it gives you those dopamine surges multiple times. Actually, let's not just confine to dopamine and oxytocin surges.
Okay.
Oxytocin and endorphins are even more nurturing than dopamine is. Dopamine promises, but seldom delivers because we are always chasing it. Oxytocin doesn't promise, but delivers. And relationships are a lot about oxytocin. And
is this different for introverts or extroverts?
Yeah, so it's interesting because at least some research shows that even introverts like to connect with people. It's just that they are picky about who they connect with. Some of them are a little bit more vulnerable to negative feedback, etc. So introverts are just more picky. I try not to look at the world with that divide. I just see that I think everybody likes to connect with someone who enhances their self-worth. See, one of the key aspects of relationships is it is very difficult to dislike somebody who likes you. So because if I tell you I like you in an authentic way without asking you to plow my driveway today, so that is an agenda-driven praise. But if I have no agenda-driven praise, then you will associate me with feeling good about yourself. And then you'll start liking me. So, for example, we have a teenager, and one of the best things you can do to your child is to praise them, whether or not they're hearing, they will get that energy eventually. And so when I sometimes, when she needs to be disciplined, I do discipline, but then I end up with saying that, when I was 14, I was much worse than you are. So then you have a better receiver.
Well, and they can then, align with what you're saying, because now it becomes this component of having that relationship and you're being real. There's going back to the component where you were just talking about the transactional nature of our interactions today. And you are just saying, taking those transactional interactions and creating a little bit more of this affiliated, this element of really taking them beyond that into something else can be very powerful in helping people live a better life. So how does one do that? How do you take that transaction with the cashier at the grocery store or the riding up the elevator with somebody? What are some hints or tips that you would suggest?
Actually, for people you have connected with, it's obviously you have to be awake to this idea. And one of the things I suggest is to remind people they were in your thoughts. So, for example, you and I chatted about 2 weeks ago. And if I remind you about something specific you said, I really loved the comment you made about how you connect with your clients. And I thought about it and I researched, get back to you. Now I've complimented you that we were connected. I take you seriously. I notice it. I process it. I'm getting back to you. So reminding people they were in your thoughts. Reminding people how they were right. So, honey, you were really right when and then fill anything after that. You've got 5 minutes of undivided attention. People love to be reminded how they were right. Taking their help. particularly with people who feel vulnerable, or teenagers, or kids, adults, both. If you seek somebody's help and implement it and give them feedback how their help helped you, then they start associating you with feeling good about themselves, because you enhance their self-worth, right? So in whatever domain the other person is strong, taking their suggestion, their help, and then simple things as I remember I was recently I talked to a colleague of mine, and I heard myself say, I didn't plan it. I said, "Oh, it's so good to hear your voice. I was missing it." And she paused and she said, "You know what? I haven't heard anyone say that to me, and I've been married 25 years."
Oh.
So I think when you authentically, here's the thing: everybody on the planet is special and struggling in their own unique way. So you're worth trillions for somebody. There was a baby shower that preceded you. There was celebration when you were born, and you were raised by, loving parents who maybe sometimes sacrifice their safety and comfort for your safety. And so you're precious. You're special in your own unique way. And I'm not saying this in a cliche, just, everybody is worth whatever. So, and then second thing is you have struggles. I know that you've got, insula and anterior cingulate cortex, which is your pain matrix. I know you've got amygdala. I know you would like your reward center to be more active than it is. So by virtue of having human brain, I know you've got struggles. So when you approach every human being, assuming they're special and struggling, you will find authentic way to helping them feel worthy. And if you can keep doing that day after day, person after person, that's how you become them. And people like your presence. Sorry.
Well, so I wanted to get back to this. You brought up, this dovetails into a question that I've been thinking about since you brought up how our brains are so sophisticated in solving problems and advancing. And as human beings, we've made tremendous advancements. At the same time, we're emotionally sort of stunted. If I'm paraphrasing incorrectly, Amit, please correct me. But why is there this dichotomy? Why are these two so opposed to each other rather than working with each other?
See, we evolved in a world which was intensely competitive. We are the successful species. So there's two of your ancestors, Bob and Bill, okay? So Bob is the happy-go-lucky type, and Bill is the better safe than sorry type. There is noise in the bushes, and Bob says, could be a tiger, but most likely a hedgehog, I'll be okay. While Bill said, could be a tiger, let me run for cover. Better safe than sorry. Guess what? A proportion of the time, it was the tiger. And so all the Bobs who were happy-go-lucky got eaten away, and the cynical ones survived to transmit their genes. So what has happened is, it's a speculative theory, but what has happened is over the years, over the centuries, millennia, we have selected intense competition, negativity, bias for survival benefit.
Right.
But that is no longer applicable, because now it is not competition that will make us succeed. It is compassion and collegiality. You know that in the NBA, the more physical touch players have, the more high fives they do, the more likely their team is going to win in the end. So it's the compassion and collegiality. The best way to be competitive in the modern world is to be compassionate and collegial. I've personally never met a compassionate provider, compassionate professional who was not, competent and collegial at the same time.
I was just reading an article this morning, actually, in regards to the social network that people have inside of the organization if they're working, and that the bigger that social network is that that people who are there with you, the more likely that you are to actually move up within the organization and to have your projects succeed and a variety of other things. And it aligns, I think, a lot with what you are saying here in that component of today. this community, this building of a network or a tribe is vastly important, and much more so than trying to say, how can I beat those people over here, and that I'm in competition with these other folks that are in the organization with me. So
we are because we belong.
Yeah,
I think that's the key. I think this whole competitive spirit is necessary, but I would like to have a different competition. I don't want to compete in my net worth. I want to compete in the number of people I'm able to help. If you're helping 10,000 people, I'm going to compete with you and help 20,000. See, so having an altruistic kind of competition which inspires you instead of engendering envy, that is what we need. Yeah. And unfortunately, one of the challenges is this in the stock market or financial world, we have to report earnings every quarter. So every company is prioritizing this quarter and the next quarter, and their options are tight. What if companies had to report earning every 3 years? All right, so let's have a 3-year vision now to develop really finding ways. I mean, I don't think there are too many entrepreneurs thinking about how do I increase forgiveness in the world. They're thinking about how do I get 1 million kids to get hooked to my app.
Yeah.
And then the collateral damage is convert those kids into zombies who are looking at their iPhones while crossing the road, right? And the driver is also looking at iPhone while driving. Or any smartphone. I don't mean iPhone alone. So that's the challenge.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to think about that again from actually a motivation work, which I've done a lot on, is when you can align people to a larger purpose. It actually is more motivational, and that purpose usually cannot be monetary in nature, because you're making $1 million for the organization and that might lead a little bit to me. That's okay. And there's motivation there, but it does not drive that intrinsic motivation that comes with, hey, how can we make this world better for 10,000 kids, for 20,000 kids, for 1 million kids? And so I think you've tapped into something there.
Yeah, I wanted to get back to intentionality. You've written a lot about intentionality. And what brought you to that? And can you share some tips about and the payoff of living life with more intentionality?
Yeah. So the flip side is living life instinctively. When I instinctively, guided by my innate instincts that are part of my evolutionary baggage, when I wake up with anxiety. I mind wander right away. I think about what should I do? What should I dread? I get upset I'm just flipping on everything. I have time pressure. I'm not courteous on the road. I'm trying to beat the competition somehow. And I see a busy calendar and I'm negative. I'm fighting myself. And every time I meet a goal, the goalpost is moved further. And so that's the instinctive form of living, which is basically driven by eat, do not get eaten, and reproduce. Those are the 3 basic instinctive drivers. Appetitive, defensive, and reproductive. Yeah. That's not satisfying. It may be satisfying to a chimpanzee, eat, do not get eaten, and reproduce. But I'm Homo sapiens. I've got, we all have beautiful prefrontal cortex. I want to enjoy, compassion and gratitude in my prefrontal cortex. I want to, of the 1,000 ice creams I've eaten in my life, the one I remember is the one that I gave to a little kid who was hungry instead of eating myself. That's the only ice cream I remember. I don't remember any other ice cream. All of this needs intentionality. I need to remind myself. Mind has a great tendency to forget, so I need to remind myself, okay, so what are the values that I want to embody? And that is the whole piece of intentional living. You intentionally pay attention to what seems ordinary. For example, when was the last time did you pause and look at your loved one's eyes, and just looked at their eyes without any problem solving or planning or judgments. That is intentionality. So you develop this intentionality to notice novelty within ordinary. You eat an apple intentionally, you sit on the chair intentionally. Yesterday we were unloading the dishwasher, and I told my daughter, remove every dish without creating any extra noise than you have to. And so touch, collect the plates very gently and see how that experience changes. That's intentionally unloading the dishwasher. It's very simple. It's not investing an hour or 2 hours just sitting focusing on breath. So, and then intentional thinking of how do I frame an experience. If someone forgot my birthday, maybe I should have compassion for them that they are very busy with their life instead of they don't care about me anymore. So this intentionality allows you to create that space between, action and response. And that space allows you to recruit your higher cortical brain. And, someone cutting you across on the road, maybe they're rushing to the ER with a sick child, right? Or they are going to have a third baby and they're rushing. So we need that intentionality. Otherwise, if you tailgate me, I'm going to get out and get into a fight with you while you're tailgating. That's our instinct.
Yeah. So how do emotions play into this intentionality? Because emotions are a big component of how we live, and they're there. How do they either enhance or distract from that intentionality?
Oh, yeah. I mean, emotions are very, very powerful. I think every experience has a flavor of emotions associated with it. And we seek uplifting emotions. And we seek uplifting emotions from two main sources, dopamine and oxytocin. Mm-hmm. And the dopamine emotion is it gives you short-term pleasure, success, winning large sums of money, novelty, seeing the big moon for the first time, tulips appearing in the so that's the dopamine. And then oxytocin and endorphins in combination are more nurturing, compassion, gratitude, forgiveness, random acts of kindness, things like that. So the more we can actively nurture these uplifting emotions, both dopamine and oxytocin. But the problem with dopamine is that it depends on something external to feed us, and it exhausts quickly. Oxytocin we can generate right now. Right now I can think about, every second 5 babies are born, every second on the planet. And I can think about, okay, I'm just going to send good wishes to those 5 babies who are being born on the planet. And every second 3 people die. So somebody's sad too at this moment. So our brain, if you ask me what is the core hunger of human brain, it is uplifting emotions.
Okay.
Earlier you talked about people with low prefrontal dopamine or particular childhood challenges. Is it harder for them to develop those oxytocin moments?
Yeah, they would struggle a little bit more because one is they may be pre-contemplative in the sense that many times you lose hope. You lose hope that there is anyone kind in the world. When those who were entrusted to love you unconditionally abuse you, you start seeing world with those eyes. It's not your fault because that's, how do you, it's almost like, when you pour concrete and if you sort of scratch few lines on that concrete, then when the concrete sets, those lines are there. Their brain was very vulnerable when they experienced abuse, and then they lose hope to that anybody would come. They'll see agenda behind kindness. Mm. They will see. They will find very little to be grateful for. So they will struggle. But at some point we have to wake up and say that shall I allow a person who shouldn't be in my story to write the title of my story? Mm. Would you allow that? If you had an abusive somebody in your past, that person doesn't belong in your story, but will you allow that person to write the title of your story for the rest of your life? The answer is no, absolutely not. And so when people realize that, then they wake up and then they implement change. I'm reminded of this lady. She had smoked for 50 years. She couldn't quit. And one day she quit like that. So I asked what happened. She said, I leaned forward to kiss my grandson, and he took 2 steps back and he said, "Grandma, you stink." And that was it. That's the power of emotions.
Yeah, that gets into that power of emotions. So for our listeners, if you had to just, and we're going to summarize, however many years of your work and experience into 2 or 3 points that if they could take anything from this hour that they've spent with us to have a better life, what are there a couple of things that you could say, hey, if you just think about this differently, or if you do these types of things, these will help. They're not going to be a pancreas and cure everything, but this is the get the path started. What would you recommend? 2 or 3 things.
I always find it difficult, but I'll try. So one is to take charge of your brain, just as you take charge of your heart. Cultivate intentional kindness to yourself and to others. There's 3 relationships we have with others, with self, and with what we consider sacred. So cultivating kindness and integrating those 3 relationships. Reframe. There is something positive and negative. If something won't matter in 5 years, it's not worth your time to get upset today. And personally, I know 2 people who are alive today because they missed their flight. Those 2, their flights crashed, but they missed it, and so they're alive. So when you go through an adversity, remember that maybe it may be protecting you from some catastrophe. You don't even know.
Wow. Well, let's thank you for those. Let's talk a little bit about music. You love music.
Oh, yes, I love music.
So tell us about what's on your playlist, and how do you experience music?
Thank you. Next. So I came from India, so I listened to classical, Indian music, and all the contemporary singers there. Of late, with my teenager daughter and my second daughter, I've been listening to all kinds of, Taylor Swift, Ariana Grande, and you name it. And I really enjoy it. I pretty much whatever is playing on either the Minnesota radio or the Minneapolis radio, Rochester radio, I enjoy it.
So you don't find a conflict between Taylor Swift and Ravi Shankar?
No, they're both using the same vocal cords. Ravi Shankar was playing his sitar, but from what I know, Taylor Swift is a wonderful. Actually, I had a article with her many years ago on gratitude, where that's my claim to fame with my teenager, that Taylor Swift and I, were in the same article, many years ago. Her Taylor Swift's attitude of gratitude. I think you will find it somewhere on Google. No, I don't find any conflict. Music has wonderful data for its effectiveness on decreasing pain, on decreasing anxiety, improving behavioral outcomes and such. I'm always impressed with the amount of literature that is available with music. And I think kids these days, they absolutely need music to calm down. Interestingly, my wife and I had a discussion whether the kids will be distracted by music when they're trying to solve math problems or whatever. So we looked at the literature, and we found that actually their learning gets better when they're listening to music, as long as it's sort of the music, not too many lyrics. So what I didn't tell our kids was that even chewing gum enhanced learning.
Tim and I have had this ongoing component. We often ask our guests, do you listen to music when you are working? Do you use music to help you focus your brain and do those different things? I do. Tim does not. And, I actually should have gone out to the literature to look up that stuff, but I did not.
Well, for me, going back to Ravi Shankar, if he's going to be doing this really great raga, I want to listen to it. I want to engage in it. I want the full experience of where he's going to take that and how it's going to go. And I want to be on that journey with the musician.
Yeah, absolutely. So two things. One is, depends on the depth of attention needed. So if I'm editing an image or, checking grammar or whatever, something simple, then I would put music. But if I really want to, create a set of lines, a series of, thoughts, like you read earlier, complex thought and from the Stress-Free Living book, then I just want to be very quiet and think about it, deeper. So I agree with both of you.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because what Tim just said, it reminded me when you're talking about living intentionally and with that focus. And so for music, it seems you have a very intentional component when you're listening to that music.
I am, yeah.
Which I don't necessarily always have. And so maybe there's a component
But you find a lot of joy.
Oh, yes, I do. But I also can use music as a background filter, and I don't have to be intentional about listening to it.
Let me share one thing. So we have X amount of attention. Let's say you have 100 units of attention. If your work is needing all 100 units of attention, then you've got no dispensable attention to give. Or if the kind of music you're listening to needs 100 units of attention. Now, if you're driving, your work needs 20 units of attention. Then you've got that rest 80. Right? Now, if you don't do anything, that rest 80 will most likely mind wander. And you will think about, mind wandering is generally not a very pleasant experience, instinctive mind wandering. So what people do now is sip coffee, listen to music, speed, and look out for police car all at the same time. So what we do is, if there is an activity that is not capturing 100 units of attention, then you can fill the rest, if you wish, with music, so you do not mind wander. Because
being intentional about how you use that, so that 100 units of attention get filled regardless. It's just as you are being, okay.
Yes, it's going to get filled regardless. So that's why when I was talking about unloading the dishwasher, if you unload dishwasher without thinking, you're going to mind wander and unload dishwasher. But if you say, I'm going to unload dishwasher without creating any extraneous noise, now that is going to absorb all your 100 units of attention.
Yeah, very interesting.
And we know that attention is a very, very limited resource. Yeah,
that's but the more intentional you are about engaging with what is, particularly if you have a baby elephant walking outside your office right now, that's going to draw your attention. It's novel, but the key is to be able to admire the grains on that stump of a dead tree. So the more you can notice novelty in what seems very mundane and boring, that's the key to train your attention. That is when your attention becomes intentional.
And is that a lot of the work on mindfulness is from my understanding, is really being able to allow yourself to be able to focus in on sometimes some of those very mundane facts and really allow your brain to look at that and explore it and have that component and not, as you said, that wandering mind.
Yes, and it was very essential for survival. Going back to where I grew up, and go back 2,000-3,000 years ago when mindfulness was conceived. You would walk. You couldn't walk 2 miles without encountering quicksand and maybe a stray dog and swarm of mosquitoes. So you had to be very aware of the world around you to survive. So mindfulness was essential to survival at that time, paying undistracted, intentional attention because you had to be safe. But now you can get by with very little attention. I mean, the other day I flew to San Diego. I crossed 10,000 people. I was in my computer all the 6 hours, right? So that's why we need to intentionally cultivate it, because when we don't, then we start mind wandering. When, have you struggled, your partner tells you 2 or 3 things and you say, what was that? Because you were not noticing.
Oh, never. That never happens to me.
your nose got a little longer right there.
You noticed. Yeah, it absolutely would. Definitely.
And I think today, to your point, the environment that we live in is not necessarily designed for us to have that, because again, we have the distractions that come with a phone, that come with the life that is constantly being barraged with advertisements, and again, looking at the number of people that we meet in our lifetime versus living in a small community in the past that, you probably didn't necessarily meet as many people and a variety of different things. So there's all of those factors are playing into this life that can kind of shortchange some of this focus and some of the mindfulness and some of this just, admiring the grains in the tree stump and not having to look and make sure and see if there's a elephant outside in my snowy backyard to draw my attention, that I should actually be able to, focus in on the beautiful, grains of wood.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what happens. My wife, I asked her a few months ago, what is your first thought when you see me at the end of the day? And she said, chores, what can I get you to do in the garage? So, so what happens is when we stop noticing novelty, when we do not intentionally choose to notice novelty, then partners become borderline boring after some time. Work becomes boring. And
transactional, right? That going back to that transactional.
Exactly. Then you start, the whole relationship becomes transactional. That is when relationship starts losing dopamine and we start distancing from each other. So in every relationship that is long-term, we have to intentionally sprinkle this noticing novelty practice. This is one of our core practices, actually, at the end of the day. So between love and novelty, I mean, most people I ask after 20 years of marriage, I say, do you love each other? Yeah, of course. So now if you're sitting at a cafeteria and your high school buddy shows up, who's going to be more interesting, your spouse or high school buddy? And everybody, I may have asked this to about 100,000 people, if not more. Everybody says high school buddy, because between me and my spouse is love. Between me and my high school buddy is novelty. See, novelty beats love. That's a bad design.
Yeah.
You want to be in the same relationship for a long time. And so that's why it's key to find novelty where love is.
Wow.
We also just had a conversation with George Lowenstein. He is working on a functional theory, a functional framework on boredom. And it might be interesting as he's working on it with another junior colleague. And I don't know how far he is away from publishing, but I can just imagine intentionality is going to have some influence on that.
Brain hates boredom. In one study, people chose to give themselves painful electric shock in preference to sitting and getting bored for 5 minutes.
Wow.
And men did much more than women, So brain hates getting bored, but a brain that is allowing itself to get bored is living in an instinctive way. It is depending on the external world to excite it. That's not going to happen. So,
it was interesting. With George, what the piece that I took out of that is he actually said boredom is physically painful for me. For him, which I had not, I not necessarily experienced that, but it's interesting that when you bring up this, is that boredom more painful than the electric shock pain that you have? And so I could see that being that's a rational trade-off. That the boredom that I have is actually manifesting itself in this pain. So I'll just take that physical pain and go from there.
So when my wife says, are you going to be okay for next 4 hours we are going? I said, you're leaving my brain to enjoy. I'm happy to enjoy my brain. So I think if you can intentionally choose to increase your dopamine and or oxytocin, then you're good to go. And of course, books and music are always there.
Yeah.
Wow. Again, Amit, this has been such a wonderful discussion. We are so grateful for your time and your insights and your intentionality in bringing such wonderful stuff to us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me. Good luck with your work, and hello to all your listeners. Take care.
Thank you, Dr. Sood. Welcome to our grooving session, where Tim and I groove on what we learned from our Behavior Grooves interview, have a free-flowing discussion on some of those topics, and whatever else comes into our happy little brains.
Or big happy brains, because
big happy brains.
Amit was big and happy and grateful and high on gratitude and humble, and it was cool.
Wonderful. So it was a great interview.
Yeah. Okay, so Kurt, so what struck you as the number one thing that you want to talk about?
So I think Amit talked a lot about applying things to your personal life. And so I thought it was really interesting to try to think about this. Well, how would I apply some of these concepts into work life, into an organization? And I think one of the really interesting pieces that struck me was this component of the different types of interactions that we can have, and how he talked about you can have an adversarial interaction. We
punch you in the nose,
right? We're going at it. Or we can have a transactional interaction, or we can have this, what he called that affiliative interaction, that more of a personal, we want a emotive kind of element where we're really showing that there's an affiliation between us.
That was cool.
And I think that's a really powerful way of thinking. And within organizations, oftentimes, particularly employee to employee within organizations, there's that component of we're really being transactional.
Very much so.
Yes, we have our group of friends, but everybody else, it's, I'm asking you to do something for me, or you're asking me to do something for you, and there's a very transactional component about it. And how can we make those transactional components more affiliative? And what are some of the ways of being able to do that?
Yeah, it certainly subscribes to the fact that we need hours of affiliative relationship in order to be happy,
which Dr. Sood talked about.
And we are going to look for it when we can. But are there things about getting hurt that prevent us, that impede our willingness to actually be affiliative in the work environment?
Well, and thinking about that work environment, right? So, I looked at this and it immediately struck me as I was thinking about this, about that 4-drive model, that need to bond, right? To bond and belong, and that affiliative component. So you would think that would be very motivational. But then to your point of being hurt, in work, oftentimes we have to be direct and we have to be demanding sometimes. And so is there a hesitancy to be more affiliative with other people, particularly maybe people who you will have to be asking to go above and beyond if you're in a leadership position or even in a position of some sort of power? So does that inhibit people from wanting to take a transactional relationship and make it more affiliative? Because if it's affiliative and you become friends with this person, and now you might have to be reprimanding them on their performance or some other component. I don't know if that's
I think it's a good question to ask, and it seems like it's a good theory to work on, and maybe that's something that we should do some research on, because that seems to make some sense.
I think there's some sense there, but I also think, wow, wouldn't it be so much more powerful to have an organization that is much more affiliative, so that we are working in this environment that is making us happy? As Dr. Sood said, we need to have these types of interactions 5-6 hours a day, something like that. I can't remember exactly what he said.
So how would that work in this growing need for responsiveness? I'm going to take us into something that was really important to me, and the way he was talking about our need for responsiveness is increasing.
Right. That 10,000 years ago, just,
meeting somebody and not beating each other up. Hey, that was a good meeting. Now it's, wow, you have to, answer that text in 30 seconds or, somebody's mad at you.
Right. So if the organization thrives, if we have ideas like from Annie Duke, where it's more important to be accurate in our communication, right, than in the ideas that we bring forward and the way that we talk to each other. That accuracy is more important than just you're just giving me the thumbs up even though you don't believe it, right?
Right.
So that's a lack of authenticity. How does that work with being more affiliative? Can we have a more affiliative relationship between the two of us at work and enhance this need for accuracy in our communication and the way we make decisions?
There's a lot in that question, right?
Yeah.
You think about, yes, so how can we strive to get to the truth, not be transactional, and be more affiliative? And yet, how do we maintain that affiliation if we're, saying things to other people who may not? And going back, Ray Dalio wrote the
Radical Transparency.
Well, he wrote a book, Principles, that he talks about his company, Radical Transparency and Radical Truth. And I think there's something there. I think there's something about creating a culture where it's expected, that truth is expected. So that affiliation component of this is actually where I'm upset with you when you're not holding me accountable, when you're not showing me how I could be wrong. And then it's less of then the transactional component is when you don't do that. And the affiliative component, conversations happen when you are actually putting that mirror up and saying, this is really you. Is that the you that you want to be?
I could imagine that. I could imagine a culture being that. And Amit even speaks to this idea of we can become habitualized to thinking about other people rather than that asshole just cut me off. Say, well, no, he has, what did he say? Low prefrontal dopamine, right?
I loved that. I loved all of his components about bringing dopamine and oxytocin and the endorphins in there because that's what I jive on that.
Really?
I'm using jive and dig. You have really influenced my words, Tim. I'm realizing this. No, on that component, I think there is something in the culture. So Ray Dalio and how he's forming his organization, I think there are some components of that if you create that type of environment. And so from an organizational perspective, we can be more affiliative. We can have that bonding and belonging motivation while still striving to get to the truth, while still doing that. And I think that's a positive component. And I think if more organizations were able to go and do that, and again, to this component of how those elements get framed in our head, right? And so you're talking about that guy cutting you off. Is the guy cutting you off in the line maybe because he has low prefrontal dopamine, but it might be because he just found out that his wife is going into labor and he has to get to the hospital.
Yeah. Or he got fired that morning and he's just really angry.
Right. And so we don't, and I loved, Amit talking about every person on this world is going through their own struggles.
Yeah.
And if we take that moment to step back and to realize that, how much better would our interactions be?
But that works against this trend toward a higher level of a demand for responsiveness, I think.
Yeah.
It's like and resulting.
Right.
It's what you did or what I felt is how I'm going to process that. And if you took too long to get back to me, and if you responded with any word that set me off, then that's what I'm going to remember. That's how I'm going to judge it, rather than. But getting back to your point, if the right culture was built within the organization, it's possible to overcome those things.
Yeah. Well, you remind me of Jonathan Haidt's new book. What?
Oh, about the coddling of the American mind.
Coddling of the American mind, right? This component that we are so fragile now, that small little things that set us off. And is that doing us any good? And particularly, I think he's talking about students in there, and the variety of universities and not allowing dispersion thoughts being, spoken on campus and various different things. There's a lot going into that. But I think there's this element of this responsiveness that you're talking to that comes down to how easily we are to be offended.
Yeah.
And
how quick we are to make that judgment.
And that lends itself not to being seeking the truth. That lends itself into taking the easy way as opposed to a more constructive but might be emotionally painful way to seek the truth. And in the end, is that the best thing for you, for the team, for the company?
Right.
For the community at whole.
That's right.
And I think that's interesting.
Which we could link back to the way Ori Brofman was talking about distributed networks and distributed decision making. If everybody's really aligned with the business objectives, there could be more distributed decision making.
Right.
People could take more responsibility if everyone is held more accountable. If there is if there's a greater sense of we're really in this together.
Yeah. And wouldn't that be a greater way to work in an organization? I think the last thing I want to talk about with Amit, and if you have more, we can go in there, but is this component of intentionality.
Yeah.
All of what we've just been talking about, if we can be more intentional in how we respond and how we think about going back to, that somebody cutting us off and instead of thinking, oh, what an asshole, framing it and thinking about it from what are the alternative reasons why that person might be cutting us off. It might be because he is an asshole.
Okay.
But it could be a number of other things. And I think within a work organization, when we quickly jump to those conclusions, or we don't go and make a decision because we're fearful of what potential consequences might come down, but if we're more intentional about how we are doing these things and thinking about them and the actions that we're taking, then I think that lends itself to being a much more productive, efficient, and a happier workplace.
Well, this sounds like system 1, system 2 thinking.
It does.
Right? I mean, this is employing more of the deliberate mind. But even with that, right, Amit indicates that we can build those habits. Like we can get into the mode of doing that and regularly taking that into consideration, just as a yes and can become part of our regular vocabulary and brainstorming and discussions and team meetings and things like that. Yes and can become the habit, so it doesn't have to be such deliberate thinking. It doesn't have to be system 2 thinking all the time.
Right, so that all of a sudden, instead of having to stop and think about, oh, that guy that cut me off might be this, or this. It's that first instinct that comes to us. It's the first response.
It can
it's
become
not the
that.
Asshole. It's the what is going on in his life that he's acting this way.
Or it's not about me.
Right. Oh, that's
how about that?
And so from an organizational perspective, what can organizations do? What can we do at work? I know we can try to take this on ourselves. We can try to think through, some of his components of thinking with gratitude and compassion and forgiveness, all of those factors. But how do you build that into an organization? Can leaders demonstrate this?
Yes. Why not? Why not expect that leaders can demonstrate it? Why? Because organizations are still very much dominated by leadership thinking and leadership actions. And so what leaders do and how they delegate and how they trust and how they show transparency and how they are intentional in their own communication can make a difference in the organization.
So I think there could be a component of just understanding, right? But then you get into the G.I. Joe fallacy, right? Information in and of itself isn't enough. But I think there could be training for leadership and then just a concerted effort by leaders to be able to do this. And that means it could leadership from the top, but it could also be if you're leading a team, you can make that concerted effort.
Yes. And make a difference.
And tying that into some of the other information that we got from some of the other podcasts that we've done, the Annie Duke, and not being a resulting and looking at, probability thinking and getting to the truth of the matter and not being right, getting to some of that distributed trust that Ori was talking about, and how do you have that trust going out within your organization. So I think that type of leadership lends itself into then some of these things that we were just talking about with Amit. So.
Okay, so with that, I just have a quick music question for you.
Great.
So a lot of this is about being open, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Amit talked about, he doesn't really discriminate between Taylor Swift or Ravi Shankar. So how about you? Do you discriminate musically?
Oh, there's music I like and music I don't like.
Yeah.
So that's discrimination, right?
Yeah.
So
me too.
So yes. So I would say I do.
Yeah. Okay. Me too.
All right.
That's
is that it?
That's it. That was a quickie.
I have one question for you, totally off topic on music, but what is the one song that if you could have written it, that you would just say, yes, that's the song that if it wasn't already written, I would want to have written that song. Is there a song?
Oh, wow, one song?
Well, multiple songs. Are there a couple?
Yeah.
All right.
There are songs
which ones?
There are songs that I think are just magical, right?
Okay, which ones?
In My Life by Paul McCartney and John Lennon.
Okay.
Just absolutely amazing. Eleanor Rigby, amazing song. Again, Beatles.
Any songs after 1978? I'm just,
about the vampire song, Jason Isbell's tune, about when we were vampires. Yeah,
if we were vampires.
Yeah, that's such a cool tune. Yeah.
Oh, that is that would be one of mine. Actually, I think that would be one.
Mine. Okay, so what else is on your list?
I would People Are People, Depeche Mode, Somebody by Depeche Mode. There's two there.
Okay.
Jason Isbell. I think there's three right there. So
that's enough.
two people. All right. Overlap. We have one at least same song there. So
absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
So with that, thank you, listeners. Hopefully this was an insightful episode, and if you did like it, please leave us a great review.
Please do.
We will have another one next week. So thank you very much. And with that,
keep on grooving.